As we progress, many readers will find themselves treading wholly new ground, but it is simply the ground that existed before it was carpeted and concealed by those whose motives were to suppress the truth for the sake of retaining control. Welcome to the Library of Awakening, hosted by CyberX, a space where curiosity meets courage and ideas come alive. Here we explore the thoughts that challenge, inspire, and sometimes even unsettle us, because growth often begins with discomfort. I know some of the perspectives that I share may be as challenging for you as they once were for me. But isn't that the beauty of exploration? Every perspective, no matter how unconventional, has something valuable to contribute to it if it's shared. Knowledge is not absolute, it's a living, breathing phenomena, shaped and reshaped over time. The important thing is not always be right, but to always be curious. Explore freely, share boldly, and learn deeply. And don't rely solely on others to validate your discoveries. Stand firm in integrity, even in the face of criticism. Remember that growth always means embracing the humility to admit when we're wrong. Learning from our errors is not a setback, it's the very essence of our progress. So, welcome to the journey. May this space inspire you to ask questions, explore the unknown, and most importantly, to awaken. This is the Library of Awakening. Let's begin. Alrighty, everybody, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of Library of Awakening. In today's episode, we're going to be reading chapter 1 of Bloodline of the Holy Grail, the Hidden Lineage of Jesus by Lawrence Gardner. Now, if at any point in time you guys want to access our vast arsenal and curated collection of hidden knowledge, information, books, PDFs, all inside of our private CyberX Discord, you guys will find hundreds of books surrounding esoteric and mystical texts, mythology and ancient civilizations, philosophy and mind science, alternative histories, forbidden archaeology, occult classics, and hermetic studies. If you guys want a vast place, centralized location to find all these documented books, PDFs, esoteric video breakdowns, head over to cyberxtrading.com. We'd love to have you on the team. With that being said, if you guys enjoy these breakdowns, do me a favor, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe to the platform, as we're going to start a video series of Library of Awakening, reading these esoteric texts to you guys, these ancient civilization texts, these philosophical and mind science texts to you all, really enlightening the general populace. Before we get into the chapter today, I want to start off by sending you guys some positive vibes and just setting the tone for the remainder of your week ahead, depending on when you're listening to this. Spreading positivity from my voice, my heart, my mind to you. Reading this post, it says, "A calm mind is the ultimate weapon. So relax. Learn to be calm. For in that stillness, you shall discover the eternal joy that flows to the essence of your being, untouched by the storms of circumstance. When you own your breath, nobody can steal your peace. Let that reside inside of you and travel with you throughout the remainder of your week as a reminder to take a deep breath, to calm yourself, to ground yourself in moments of chaos and handle situations promptly and with purpose." With that being said, let's roll over to this chapter. So, before we get started, why would anybody want to consider reading Bloodline of the Holy Grail? In my personal opinion, that is because it is a book that offers a compelling exploration into the hidden lineage of Jesus, challenging traditional historical and religious narratives. The book delves into intriguing historical accounts, genealogies, and secret societies, providing a perspective that encourages critical thinking about the origins of Christianity and the possible continuities of sacred bloodlines. It also connects archaeological findings, ancient symbols, and historical figures, which can enrich one's understanding of esoteric traditions and their influence on modern history. Overall, I found the book very knowledgeable, very informational, and expanded my awareness on the origins of Christianity and the bloodlines that still exist in this world today. The book definitely appeals to those interested in alternative history, spiritual mysteries, and a quest for hidden truths beyond revered legends. So, today we're going to read chapter 1, Origins of the Bloodline. I found this chapter to be one of the most mind altering chapters of the entire book because it starts off making you think critically and wanting to finish the entirety of what's in store for the rest of the book. I will leave that up to you guys. I will enlighten you all with chapter 1. So, whom does the Grail serve? Following the Jewish revolt in Jerusalem during the 1st century AD, the Roman overlords were reputed to have destroyed all records concerning the Davidic legacy of Jesus, the Messiah's family. The destruction was far from complete. However, irrelevant documents were retained by Jesus' heirs, who brought the Masonic heritage from the Near East to the West. As confirmed by the ecclesiastical history of Eusebius, the 4th century bishop of Caesarea, these heirs were called the Disopiani, ancient Greek for of the master, a hallowed style reserved exclusively for those in the same family descent as Jesus. Theirs was the sacred legacy of the royal house of Judah, a dynastic bloodline that lives on today. During the course of this book, we shall study the compelling story of this sovereign lineage by unfolding a detailed genealogical account of the Messianic blood royal, the Grail, in direct descent from Jesus and his brother James. However, in order to cover this ground, it will firstly be necessary to consider the Old and New Testament Bible stories from a different perspective to that normally conveyed. This will not be a rewriting of history, but a reshaping of familiar accounts, bringing history back to its original base, rather than perpetuating the myths of strategic restyling by those who otherwise have vested interests. In this later respect, there will undoubtedly be some who will contest what follows. Others will endeavor to uphold customary ideas by leveling destructive criticism against these pages. This being the case, one can but trust that such critics will have their contentions fully weighted. For as the Rev. Lewis of Glastonbury identified in 1922, destructive criticism is often its own destroyer, while its intended prey remains better off for being attacked. Meanwhile, this book generally written for the reader with an open mind and a quest for spirit. Its authority rests with revolutionary interpretations of ancient documents from the Holy Land, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and with many gospels and early texts that were conveniently obscured from the public domain. Recorded facts have also been culled from Celtic annals and from chronicles of the Dark Ages, along with much information from the sovereign, saintly, and chivalric archives of Europe. Throughout the centuries and ongoing church and governmental conspiracies, they have prevailed against the Messianic inheritance. This heightened when imperial Rome diverted the course of Christianity to suit an alternative ideal, and has continued to this present day. Many apparently unconnected events of history have in fact been chapters of that same continuing suppression of the line. From the Jewish wars of the 1st century to the 18th century American Revolution and beyond, the machinations have been perpetuated by English and European governments in collaboration with the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches, in their attempts to constrain the royal birthright of Judah. The high Christian movements have installed various figurehead regimes, including Britain's own House of Hanover, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha. Such administrations have been compelled to uphold specific religious doctrines, while others have been deposed for preaching religious forbearance. Now, with the turn of the new millennium at hand, this is time for reflection and reform in the civilized world. And to accomplish such reform is to appropriate to consider the errors and success of the past. For this purpose, there is no better record than that which exists within the chronicles of the Sangreal. The definition of the Holy Grail first appeared in the Middle Ages as a literacy concept, based, as will be later discussed, on a series of scribal misinterpretations. It derived immediately as a translation from Saint Grail, and thence from the earlier forms Sangreal and Sangreal. The ancient order of the Sangreal, a dynastic order of the Scots royal house of Stuart, was directly allied to the continental European order of the realm of Sion. The knights of both orders were adherents of the Sangreal, which, as given above, defines the true blood royal, the Sangreal of Judah, the bloodline of the Holy Grail. Quite apart from its dynastic physical aspect, the Holy Grail also has a spiritual dimension. It has been symbolized by many things, but as a material item, it is mostly commonly perceived as a chalice, especially a chalice that contains or once contained the lifeblood of Jesus. The Grail has additionally been portrayed as a vine, weaving its way through the annals of time. The fruit of the vine is the grape, and from the grape comes wine. In this respect, the symbolic elements of the chalice and the vine coincide, for wine has long been equated with the blood of Jesus. Indeed, this tradition sits at the very heart of the Eucharist's Holy Communion sacrament, and the perpetual blood of the Grail chalice represents no less than the enduring Messianic bloodline. An esoteric, hidden meaning, Grail lore, the chalice and vine support the ideal of service, whereas the blood and the wine correspond to the eternal spirit of fulfillment. The spiritual quest of the Grail is therefore a desire for fulfillment through giving and receiving service. That which is called the Grail Code is itself a parable for the human condition, and that it is the quest of us all to serve, and by serving, to achieve. The problem is that the precept of the code has been overwhelmed by an avaricious society complex based on the notion of the survival of the fittest. Today, it is plain that wealth, rather than health, is a major stepping stone towards being socially fit. Another criterion is obedience to the law. But above all such considerations, there is a further requirement, the requirement to toe the party line while paying homage to the demigods of power. This prerequisite has nothing to do with obeying the law or with behaving properly. It relies totally on not rocking the boat and on withholding opinions that do not conform. Those who break ranks are declared heretics, meddlers, and troublemakers, and as such are deemed socially unfit by their governing establishment. Perceived social fitness is consequently attained by submitting to indoctrination and forsaking personal individuality in order to preserve the administrative status quo. By any standard of reckoning, this can hardly be described as a democratic way of life. The democratic ideal has been expressed as government by the people for the people. To facilitate the process, democracies are organized on an electoral basis whereby the few represent the many. Their representatives are chosen by people to govern for the people, but the paradoxical result is generally government of the people. This is contrary to all principles of democratic community and has nothing whatever to do with service. It is therefore in direct opposition to the Grail Code. At a national and local level, elected representatives have long managed to reverse the harmonious ideal behind setting themselves upon pedestals above their electorate. By virtue of this, individual rights, liberties, and welfare are controlled by political dictate, and such dictates determine who is socially fit and who is socially unfit at any given time. In many cases, this even corresponds to decisions on who shall survive and who shall not. To this end, there are many people who seek positions of influence for the sheer sake of gaining power over others. Serving their own interests, they obey the common manipulators of society, causing the disempowerment of the majority. The result is that instead of being rightly served, that same majority is reduced to a state of servitude. It is not by any chance that from the Middle Ages the motto of Britain's Princes of Wales has been Ich dien or I serve. The motto was born directly from the Grail Code during the Age of Chivalry, coming to power through heredity lineage. Rather than being elected, it was important for those next in line to promote the ideal of service. But have the monarchs actually served? More to the point, whom have they served? In general, and certainly throughout the feudal and imperial eras, they have ruled in collusion with their ministers and with the church. Rule is not service, and it has no part in the justice, equality, and tolerance of the democratic ideal. It is therefore quite inconsistent with the maxim of the Holy Grail. Accordingly, this book, Bloodline of the Holy Grail, is not restricted in content to genealogies and tales of political intrigue, but its pages hold the key to the essential Grail code, the key not only to a historical mystery, but to a way of life. It is a book about good government and bad government. It tells about how the patriarchal kingship of people was supplanted by dogmatic tyranny and the dictatorial overlordship of territory. It is a journey of discovery through past ages, with its eye set firmly on the future. In the present age of computer technology, satellite telecommunications, and international space industries, scientific advancements take place at an alarming rate. With each stage of development arriving ever more quickly, the functionally competent will emerge as the survivors, while the rest will be considered unfit by an impetist establishment that serves its own ambitions but not its subjects. So, what is all this to do with the Grail? Everything. The Grail has many guises and many attributes, as will be revealed. Yet, in whatever form it is portrayed, the Grail quest is governed by an overriding desire for honest achievement. It is the route by which all can survive among the fit, for it is the key to harmony and unity at every social and natural station. The Grail Code recognizes advancement by merit. It acknowledges community structure, but above all things, it is entirely democratic. Whether apprehended in its physical or spiritual dimension, the Grail belongs to leaders and followers alike. It belongs also to the land and the environment, enjoining that all should be as one in a common, unified service. In order to be numbered among the fit, it is necessary to be fully informed. Only through awareness can preparation be made for the future. Dictatorial rule is not a route to information. It is a positive constraint designed to prevent free access to the truth. So whom does the Grail serve? It serves those who quest despite the odds, for they are the champions of enlightenment. The pagan idols of Christendom. In the course of our journey, we shall confront a number of assertions that may at first seem startling, but this is often the case when setting historical matters to rights. For most of us have been conditioned to accept certain interpretations of history as matters of fact. To a large extent, we all have learned history by way of strategic propaganda, whether church or politically motivated. It is all part of a control process. It separates the masters from the servants and the fit from the unfit. Political history has, of course, long been written by its masters, the few who decide the fate and fortunes of the many. Religious history is no different, for it is designed to implement control through fear of the unknown. In this way, the religious masters have retained their supremacy at the expense of the devotees who generally seek enlightenment and salvation. In relation to political or religious history, it is truism that establishing teachings often themselves border on the fantastic, but they are nonetheless rarely questioned. When less than fantastic, they are often instead so vague that they actually make little sense when examined with any depth of scrutiny. In biblical terms, our Grail quest begins with the creation as defined in the book of Genesis. A little more than 2 centuries ago, in 1779, a consortium of London booksellers issued the mammoth 42-volume Universal History, a work that came to be much revered and which stated with considered assurance that God's work of creation began on 21st August 4004 BC. A debate ensued over the precise month, for some theologians reckon that 21st of March was more likely the date. All agreed, nevertheless, that the year was accurate, and everyone accepted that there were only 6 days between cosmic nothingness and the emergence of Adam. At the time of publication, Britain was in the grip of the Industrial Revolution. It was an unsettled period of extraordinary change and development, but, as with today's rapid rate of advancement, there were social prices to pay. The prized skills and crafts of yesteryears became obsolete in the face of mass production, and society was regrouped to accommodate an economically based community structure. A new breed of winners emerged while the majority floundered in unfamiliar environments that bore no relation to the customs and standards of their upbringing. Rightly or wrongly, this phenomenon is called progress, and the relentless criterion of progress is that very precept propounded by the English naturalist Charles Darwin: the survival of the fittest. The problem is that people's chances of survival are often diminished because they are ignored or exploited by their masters, those same prisoners who forged the route to progress, aiding, if not guaranteeing, their own survival. It is easy to now appreciate that the 1779 universal history was wrong. We know that the world was not created in 4004 BC. We also know that Adam was not the first man on earth. Such archaic notions have been outgrown, but to the people of the late 18th century, this impressive history was the product of men more learned than most, and it was naturally presumed correct. It is therefore worth posing ourselves a question at this stage. How many of today's accepted facts of science and history will also be outgrown in the light of future discoveries? Dogma is not necessarily truth. It is simply a fervently promoted interpretation of truth based on available facts. When new influential facts are presented, scientific dogma changes as a matter of course. But this is rarely the case with religious dogma. In this book, we are particularly concerned with the attitudes and teachings of a Christian church which pays no heed to discoveries and revelations, and which still upholds much of the incongruous dogma that dates from the medieval times. As H.G. Wells so astutely observed during the early 1900s, the religious life of Western nations is going on in a house of history built upon sand. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and the descent of man in 1871 caused no personal harm to Adam, but any thought of his being the first living human was naturally discredited. Like all the organic life forms on the planet, humans had evolved by genetic mutation and natural selection through hundreds of thousands of years. The announcement of this fact struck religious-minded societies with horror. Some simply refused to accept the new doctrine, but many fell into despair. If Adam and Eve were not primal parents, there was no original sin, and the very reason for the atonement was therefore without foundation. The majority completely misunderstood the concept of natural selection. They deduced that if survival was restricted to that of the fittest, then success must be dependent on outdoing one's neighbor. Thus, a new susceptible and ruthless generation was born. Egotistical nationalism flourished as never before, and the domestic deities were venerated, as were the pagan gods of the old. Symbols of national identity, such as Britannia and Hibernia, became the new idols of Christendom. From this unhealthy base was generated an imperialist disease, and the stronger advanced countries claimed the right to exploit less developed nations. The new age of empire building began with an undignified scramble for territorial domain. The German Reich was founded in 1871 through the amalgamation of hit-hero separate states. Other states combined to form Austro-Hungarian empires. The Russian Empire expanded considerably by the 1890s. The British Empire occupied no less than one-fifth of the entire global landmass. This was the impassioned era of the resolute Christian missionaries, many of them dispatched from Queen Victoria's Britain. With the religious fabric sorely rent at home, the church sought a revised justification abroad. The missionaries were especially busy in such places as India and Africa, where the people already had their own beliefs and had never heard of Adam. More importantly, they had never heard of Charles Darwin. In Britain, a new intermediate stratum in society had emerged from the employers of the Industrial Revolution. This burgeoning middle class set the true aristocracy and the governing establishment far beyond the reach of people at large, effectively creating a positive class structure, a system of divisions in which everyone had a designated place. The chieftains wallowed in Arcadian pursuits, while the middle class opportunists competed for stations through conspicuous consumption. The working man accepted his serfdom with songs of elegance, a dream of hope and glory, and a portrait of the tribal priestess, Britannia, above his mantel shelf. Students of history knew it would not be long before empires set their sights against each other, and they forecast a day when competing powers would meet in mighty opposition. The conflict began when France endeavored to recover Alsace-Lorraine from German occupation. While the pair battled over the territory's iron and coal reserves, Russia and Austria-Hungary locked horns in a struggle for dominion of the Balkans, and there were disputes resulting from colonial ambitions in Africa and elsewhere. The fuse was lit in June 1914 when Serbian nationalists murdered the heir to the Austrian throne, Archduke Francis Ferdinand. At this, Europe exploded into a great war, largely instigated by Germany. Hostilities were commenced against Serbia, Russia, France, and Belgium, and the counteroffensive was led by Britain. The struggle lasted for more than 4 years, coming to an end when a revolt erupted in Germany. An emperor, Kaiser William II, fled the country, following all technological advancements of manufacturing ages. History had made little progress in social terms. Engineering achievements had led to unprecedented martial ability, while Christianity had become so fragmented as to be barely recognized. Britain's pride emerged intact, but the German Reich was not of mind to take its losses lightly. With the old regime overthrown, a fervent new party rose to dominance. Its despotic Führer, or leader. Adolf Hitler annexed Austria in 1937 and swept into Poland 2 years later. The Second Great War, a truly world war, had begun. The fiercest territorial struggle to date. It was waged through 6 years and was centered upon the very core beliefs of religion itself, the rights of everyone in the civilized environment. Quite suddenly, the church and people realized that religion was not and never had been about dates and miracles. It was about belief and a neighborly way of life and application of moral standards and ethical values of faith and charity and the constant quest for freedom and deliverance. At last, any continuing general dispute about the evolutionary nature of human descent was put aside. That was the province of scientists, and the majority relaxed its acceptance of the fact. The church emerged as a far less fearful opponent of scholars, and the new environment was more agreeable to all concerned. For many, the text of the Bible had no longer to be regarded as inviolable dogma and venerated for its own sake. Religion was embodied in its precepts and principles, not in the paper on which it was printed. Indeed, the Bible was a book of history and record, a collection of ancient texts worthy of inquiry and study like any other. This new perspective gave rise to endless speculative possibilities. If Eve had truly been the only woman in existence and the only offspring with 3 sons, then with whom did her son Seth unite to father the tribe of Israel? If Adam was not the first man on earth, what actually was his significance? Who or what were the angels? The New Testament also had its share of mysteries. Who were the apostles? Did the miracles really happen? And most importantly, did the virgin birth and resurrection genuinely take place as described? We shall consider all of these questions before we embark on the trail of the Grail bloodline itself. In fact, it is imperative to understand Jesus' historical and environmental background in order to comprehend the facts of his marriage and parental fatherhood. As we progress, many readers will find themselves treading wholly new ground, but it is simply the ground that existed before it was carpeted and concealed by those whose motives were to suppress the truth for the sake of retaining control. Only by rolling back the carpet and revealing this long hidden ground can we succeed in our quest for the Holy Grail. It is now generally acknowledged that the opening chapters of the Old Testament do not accurately represent the early history of the world, as they appear to suggest. More precisely, they tell the story of a family that in time became a race comprising various tribes, a race that in turn became the Hebrew nation. If Adam can never be said to have been the first of a type, notwithstanding the whole of human evolution behind him, then he was certainly a progenitor of the Hebrews and the tribes of Israel. Two of the most intriguing characters of the Old Testament are Joseph and Moses. Each played an important role in the formation of the Hebrew nation, and both have historical identities that can be examined quite independently of the Bible. Genesis 41, 39, and 43 tell how Joseph was made governor of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto the word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And he made him rule over all the land of Egypt. Referring to Moses in Exodus 11:3, informs us similarly that Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. Yet for all of this status and prominence, neither Joseph nor Moses appear in any Egyptian record under either of those names. The Annals of Ramses II, from 1304 to 1237 BC, specifically that Semitic people were settled in the land of Goshen. It is further explained that they went there from the Canaan for the want of food. But why should Ramses' scribes mention the settlement at Goshen? According to standard Bible chronology, the Hebrews went to Egypt some 3 centuries before the time of Ramses and made their exodus in about 1491 BC, long before he became to the throne. So, by virtue of this first-hand scribal record, the standard Bible chronology, as generally promoted, is seen to be incorrect. It is traditionally presumed that Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt in the 1720s BC and was made governor by the pharaoh a decade or so later. Afterwards, his father Jacob, Israel, and 70 family members followed him into Goshen to escape the famine in Canaan. Notwithstanding this, Genesis 47:11 and Exodus 1:11 and Numbers 33:3 all refer to the land of Ramses, in Egyptian, the house of Ramses. This was a complex of grain storehouses built by the Israelites for Ramses II in Goshen some 300 years after they were supposedly there. It transpires, therefore, that alternative Jewish reckoning is more accurate than the standard chronology. Joseph went to Egypt not in the early 18th century BC, but in the early 15th century BC. There he was appointed chief minister to Thutmose. To the Egyptians, however, Joseph, the vizier, was known as Yah, and his story is particularly revealing, not just in relation to the biblical account of Joseph, but also in respect of Moses. The Cairo-born historian and linguist Ahmed Osman has made an in-depth study of these personalities in their contemporary Egyptian environment, and his findings are of great significance. When Pharaoh Thutmose died, his son married his sibling's sister, Sitamen, as was the pharaonic tradition, so that he could inherit the throne as Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Shortly afterwards, he also married Tai, the daughter of Chief Minister Joseph Yoya. It was decreed, however, that no son born to Tai could inherit the throne. Because of the overall length of her father's Joseph governorship, there was a general fear that the Israelites were gaining too much power in Egypt. So when Tai became pregnant, the edict was given that her child should be killed at the birth of a son. Sai's Jewish relatives lived at Goshen and had herself owned a summer palace a little upstream at Zar, where she went to have her baby. She did indeed bear a son, but the royal midwives conspired with Tai to float the child downstream in a reed basket to the house of her father's half-brother Levi. The boy, Amendap, born 1394 BC, was duly educated in the eastern Delta country by the Egyptian priests of Ra. In his teenage years, he went to live at Thebes. By that time, his mother had acquired more influence than the senior queen, Setumen, who had never borne a son and heir to the pharaoh, only a daughter who was called Nefertiti. In Thebes, Amenhotep could not accept the Egyptian deities and the Marides' idols, and so he introduced the notion of Aten, an omnipotent god who had no image. Aten was thus the equivalent of the Hebrew Adoni, a title borrowed from the Phoenician and meaning Lord. In line with the Israelite teachings, at that time, Amenhotep, Hebrew equivalent of Amenhotep, Amun, is pleased. Change his name to Akhenaten, the servant of Aten. Pharaoh Amenhotep then suffered a period of ill health. Because there was no direct male heir to the royal house, Akhenaten married his half-sister Nefertiti in order to rule as co-regent during this difficult time. When in due course Amenhotep III died, Akhenaten was able to succeed as pharaoh, was officially called Amenhotep IV. Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters and a son, Tutankhaten. Pharaoh Akhenaten closed all the temples of the Egyptian gods and built new temples to Aten. He also ran a house that was distinctly domestic, quite different from the kingly norm in ancient Egypt. On many fronts, he became unpopular, particularly with the priests of the former national deity Amun or Amen. And the sun god Ra, or Re, plots against his life proliferated. Loud were the threats of armed insurrections if he did not allow the traditional gods to be worshipped alongside the faceless Aten. But Akhenaten refused and was eventually forced to abdicate in short-term favor of his cousin, Smenkhare, who was succeeded by Akhenaten's son, Tutankhaten, on taking the throne at the age of about 11. Tutankhaten was obliged to change his name to Tutankhamen. He in turn was only to live the rule for a further 9 or 10 years, meeting his death while still comparatively young. Akhenaten, meanwhile, was banished from Egypt. He fled with some retainers to the remote safety of Sinai, taking with him his royal scepter, topped with a brass serpent. To his supporters, he remained very much the rightful monarch, the heir to the throne from which he had been ousted, and he was still regarded by them as the Mos, or Moses, or Moses, heir born of, as in the Tutmosis, born of Tooth, and Ramses, fashioned of Ra. Evidence from Egypt indicates that Moses, Akhenaten, led his people from Pi-Ramses, near modern Contra, southward through Sinai towards Lake Tamish. This was extremely marshy territory, and although manageable on foot, with some difficulty any pursuing horses and chariots would have foundered disastrously. Among the retainers who fled with Moses were the sons and families of Jacob, Israel. Then, at the instigation of their leader, they constructed the tabernacle at the foot of Mount Sinai. Once Moses had died, they began their invasion of the country left by their forefathers so long before. But Canaan, Palestine, had changed considerably in the meantime, having been infiltrated by waves of Palestinians and Phoenicians. The records tell a great sea of battles and a massive army marching to war. At length, the Hebrews, under their new leader, Joshua, were successfully, and once across the Jordan, they took Jericho from the Canaanites, gaining a real foothold in their traditional promised land. Following Joshua's death, the ensuing period of rule by appointed judges was a catalogue of Jewish disaster until the desperate Hebrew tribes united under their first king, Saul, in about 1055 BC. But the conquest of the Palestine or Canaan, as complete as possible, David of Bethlehem, a descendant of Abraham, married Saul's daughter to become king of Judah, corresponding to half the Palestinian territory. By 1048 BC, he had also acquired Israel, the balance of territory becoming overall the king of Jews. The bloodline of the Holy Grail had begun. What an intriguing first chapter. I hope that this encourages you guys to read a bit further into this book and expand your awareness and knowledge into our ancient history as a civilization. Again, if you guys want access to our vast storehouse and curated collection of knowledge of esoteric, mystical, philosophical, mind science, alternative histories, and forbidden archaeological texts, you guys can always head over to cyberxtrading.com. You can tap into our private CyberX Discord, where there are literally thousands of documented PDFs, books, videos, esoteric knowledge that will enlighten you and hopefully motivate you to expand your awareness and knowledge about our history. As always, many blessings to you guys. If you enjoyed, do me a favor, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next episode.